Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42 here talking about tonight's slate, and we've got an interesting one. 10 games on tap, one of them being a Coors Field game, a couple big names on the mound. So obviously DraftKings, you got to play two pitchers. So my thought is I'm going to be pairing one of these top guys with a cheaper arm, but I'm going to be, I guess depending on your preference on these cheap guys. But we'll go ahead and get into it. Starting off at the top, David Price is $12,400, facing off against the Yankees. He's a monster favorite, minus 240, 8-run total. This game is in Toronto and not New York. Not that you really like either place for a pitcher. Both places, hitters' parks. Price has been good against the Yankees. Last time out, only 5 innings, but only 2 earned runs, 7 Ks. Faced them 2 times in a row before that. Went 7 shutout innings at New York. Gave up 11 hits in 7 1/3, but 3 earned runs. Last time was 6 strikeouts at the Rogers Center. So he's been good, but not great. I think he's a GPP option for me in this game, despite being a huge total, because it is in the Rogers Center. And, that's just I just don't see him having a ton of upside. I do think he's got a nice floor, but that floor might be 18 fantasy points. I'm looking for more like 25 if I'm paying $12K for somebody. So behind him, Chris Archer, also a GPP play for me. He hasn't been great recently. He's been good, but not Chris Archer good. Not the kind of guy that we've been expecting the performances of. And over the past 30 days, he's been a guy who's been getting a lot of strikeouts, but he hasn't been great outside of that, though. 29% strikeout rate, only a 43% ground ball rate, walk rate of almost 10%, 0.92 home runs per 90 you don't really like, and the hard hit rate, 42.5%. That's concerning for me. That makes him a GPP-only option there as well. The guy I'll be probably locking into my cash games at first, despite an awful performance last time out. It was a bad scenario, but Dallas Keuchel, $11,400 at home against the Angels. Minus 195 favorite, 8-run total for him. And this is a guy that, including that last game over the last 30 days, has been great. 31.1% strikeout rate, 14.1% swing and strike rate, over a 54% ground ball rate. The home runs per 9 kind of skewed because he did give up 3 in that game and 3 against Minnesota. All 3 he gave up against Minnesota were solo shots. And this is a guy that has not given up very many home runs at all this season. So I'm not really concerned about those 2 games. He ended up still with almost 36 DraftKings points in that Minnesota game. Obviously, last game was negative at Texas, but I think he's the guy you want to lock in first. That's the guy I'll be going to. Outside of him, there are some other interesting options. Gio Gonzalez against Baltimore. Baltimore with one of the highest strikeout rates of any team over the last 30 days. Gio with 10-plus strikeouts in 2 of his last 3. He's also gone, given up 2, 1, and 0 earned runs in his last 3 starts. Granted, those games were Atlanta, Miami, and Philadelphia, so you don't quite expect that type of upside against a good offense in Baltimore. But I love him at $9,600. I think he's a fine play there. Below him, one interesting play here is Eduardo Rodriguez, a guy who's been pitching very well recently. 7 of his last 9 starts, he's given up 2 earned runs or less. Facing a Tampa Bay team that's very good against left-handed pitching. So obviously, you're certainly not going to be playing him in your cash games, but I think he's an interesting tournament option because the Rays as a whole do hit lefties well, and they have a lot of individuals who hit lefties well, but they're also an offense that's inconsistent. So this is a guy that I'm looking at in tournaments, probably more like a single bullet type of guy. If you've got 1 entry, there's no way he'd be anywhere near my lineup, but if you've got like 10, I'll be throwing him in there in 1, maybe 2. Cheaper guys here, Jason Hamill's interesting against a Milwaukee team that's just not very good. Hamill also hasn't been great recently, though. 4-3, 4-3 earned runs his last 4 starts. $7,800. I think he's worth a look. Probably a guy that won't end up in my lineups. But behind him, you got a couple interesting ones. You got Brett Anderson against Arizona. Yes, Arizona has some guys, and as a whole, they hit left-handed pitching fairly well. But Anderson's one of those nice high-floor guys. Doesn't have a huge ceiling, but you can usually count on him to get you 15 to 18 fantasy points, especially with this game being in LA and not in Arizona. That's a big bump for him. And then 2 other guys I'm looking at as cheap options. John Lamb against the Cardinals. The Cardinals, we know, as a team, struggle against left-handed pitching. And Lamb showed that at home at Great American. Obviously, a much tougher environment. Went 6 innings, just 3 hits, 6 strikeouts. Did have 6 walks in that game, but almost 22 fantasy points on DraftKings. This one obviously in St. Louis, an upgrade in park factors for him, and not for the hitters, of course. But at $6,800, I think he's worth a look as a secondary option. John Neese against Atlanta. We know Atlanta's terrible against lefties. John Neese hasn't been very good in general recently. 6 total strikeouts over his last 3 starts. He's allowed 5 or more earned runs in 4 of his last 5. $5,800, he's not a safe option, but he's a guy that has a great matchup for cheap, so he's a guy that I'll be giving a look in a couple formats there as well. Catcher options for tonight. You're going to want to get yourself some pieces of Coors Field, as I already mentioned, but if Kyle Schwarber's in, Willie Peralta's been one of the worst pitchers in all of baseball against left-handed batters since his entire career, actually, his short career, I should say. 372 WOBA this year. Obviously, this is a trend. This is not, this isn't even really a trend. This is just what he is. He's terrible against lefties. A lot of good left-handed bats. If Kyle Schwarber, for some reason, is too expensive for you, $1,100 Miguel Montero, if he's in the lineup, or $1,100 cheaper, I should say. Sorry, $3,500. I like him. Other options for you, if Willen Rosario plays, he's listed at $2,500. Obviously, you prefer him against a lefty than a righty, but $2,500 for some pop at Coors Field. You absolutely got to love that. Outside of him, not a whole lot that I love. You got some guys who've hit well. JP Arenciba's over $4,000. No way I'm paying for that. If I'm paying near that price and it's not for Schwarber, it'd be Russell Martin at $3,900 in this one. But even that one, you're just looking for a big game from Toronto, which they certainly could give you against Adam Warren. But the Yankee bullpen pretty good. So for me, I'm going to pay for Schwarber if I can. But if Willen Rosario's in, I mean, that's the guy you almost have to play in your cash games. First base options, I love Anthony Rizzo tonight. Same reasons as Kyle Schwarber. He's got great numbers against righties. Peralta awful against lefties. $5,000, that's the guy that I'm going to be playing if I'm paying up. Other options if you're paying up, of course, Edwin Encarnacion at home. $5,100 for him is expensive, but facing the bad pitcher in Adam Warren, you can certainly beat. Paul Goldschmidt gets a lefty. I mentioned him and Brett Anderson. Anderson's not a bad lefty, but slightly above average. That's the guy I'm looking at. But interesting option here for GPPs, David Ortiz. It's Chris Archer. He's given up a lot of hard contacts. People still avoid him, and rightfully so. But David Ortiz has had some success against him, 9 for 23 with a couple homers. $4,700. I'm looking at him as my low-owned guy that could actually provide you with a ton of upside. Pedro Alvarez, of course, as a tournament option at $4,100 at Coors Field. But then once you're looking down here, these are the guys you're going to be playing your cash games. Justin Morneau, $3,500 against AJ Burnett. If for some reason he's not in the lineup, then Ben Paulson at $31. Makes a lot of sense as a cheap Coors Field bet. Really nobody else that stands out. You can look at Lucas Duda at home. Obviously that Mets offense has been hot. Shelby Miller struggles with left-handed batters, and Lucas Duda, $3,300, gives you a lot of upside there for a cheap price tag. Second base options, of course, if you're not playing Eduardo Rodriguez, which you probably aren't in most formats, Logan Forsythe at $3,900 really jumps off the page. He smashes lefties, coming off a huge game last time against Baltimore as well. Other guys to look at, Neil Walker at Coors Field at $4,500 is a good option. Josh Harrison, second base, third base eligibility now instead of third base outfield that he used to have. He's also at Coors Field. I really like Chris Coughlin at $3,500. Another guy that hits from the left side of the plate against Willie Peralta. And it's at not Coors Field, at Wrigley Field. So great spot for him there. Other options, if you're looking for cheap, you got Steve Pearce against the lefty. It's $3,000. Scooter Gennett, $2,900 against Jason Hamlin, who I mentioned has not been very good recently. And if you just want to get yourself a cheap piece of the Toronto Blue Jays tonight, $2,700 Ryan Goins, probably going to bat 7th or 8th tonight. He's a decent filler if you don't have any other better options there. If he just kind of fits and you like the rest of your lineup, I don't mind that one. Third base options, for me, it's Nolan Arenado, and it's everyone else. Arenado at home, smashes right-handed pitching. A.J. Burnett's only given up 8 home runs this year, but Arenado, if I got to bet on one guy to take him deep, it's going to be Arenado. And that would definitely be number 40. So Arenado, I believe it's 36 of those home runs off right-handed pitching this season. So that's a great spot. Chris Bryant is a righty against Peralta, who he's much better against, but this game is also in Wrigley Field. Peralta, I don't consider a very good pitcher, barely above average. So he's a guy I'm looking at. Todd Frazier for tournaments against the lefty and Garcia, who has been good. Frazier, after that slow start to the second half, having a couple big games recently. So I'm definitely giving him a look. Other guys, as you're scrolling down cheaper, Anthony Rendon against Ubaldo Jimenez. I think he's in a good spot. Evan Longoria, as always, against the lefty. He's a great play, $3,800. Nice cash game play for you there. And then cheaper guys, Really one guy that's standing out to me, and that's Nick Castellanos, $3,300 against Eric Johnson, who's been okay, but really nothing special. Castellanos, the guy, should be batting right around 6th, I would assume, tonight. $3,300, I like his discount if you can't get a guy like Longoria for $500 more. Shortstop options, I mean, you see Corey Seager is $5,900 at L.A. against Julius Chassin. I mean, you're obviously not paying that price. Like, that's a pricing mistake for him there. But just wanted to point that one out. Absolutely ridiculous price tag. Carlos Correa, $4,500 against fly ball pitcher Jared Weaver in Houston at Minute Maid Park. You got to love that. Outside of that, I mean, of course, Jose Reyes in play. $4,100 at Coors Field against Burnett. You got to like him. And then your cheaper options, I like Eugenio Suarez at $3,600. He gets a lefty. And Jaime Garcia, who I mentioned, has been good. But this guy's been smashing lefties, so that's a good punt for you there. And then I'm looking for cheap shortstop options for the Colorado Rockies. If we obviously don't know exactly who's going to be in the lineup, but Daniel Descalso is absolute minimum salary. You don't love him. Other guy, Christian Adams, is a guy that you can consider if he's in the lineup. He's been in the lineup last game. Has had 2 starts in the last 4 games, looks like, but absolute minimum. He's a nice play. And as we know, Descalso really not much upside, and Adams doesn't have a ton more, but certainly a guy to consider there. Outfield options, you know the drill with the Coors Field here. The guys you're looking for, Andrew McCutchen, 5.5 run total for the Pirates. You got to love him. Starling Marte, Gregory Polanco, all those guys very expensive, but rightfully so. On the Colorado side, Corey Dickerson's one of my favorite values on the night tonight. He was the best hitter in baseball in terms of WOBA. In 2014. He's missed a whole lot of time this year, but he's a guy who still has solid numbers this season, so he's in a good spot there. Charlie Blackmon against Burnett as well. Carlos Gonzalez is only $4,400. I think I prefer Blackmon because, like I said, Burnett doesn't give up a lot of home runs. That's not to say that he won't tonight, but I like these speed guys for similar price. Other guys you can look at, Bryce Harper's at home. He's $6,100, but the guy's been on an absolute tear recently, up to 41 homers. He's killing the ball, so the guy to consider for your tournaments. No way I would ever be playing him in a cash game at that price on this slate. Other guys to consider in your outfield, Jason Worth, another guy who's hitting well. He's $4,400. Curtis Granderson, another lefty against Shelby Miller at 42. Mets in a fine spot against him here. I like Dexter Fowler, switch hitter. Obviously, he'll be hitting from the left side against Willie Peralta. You can kind of see how many guys he's going to have to navigate there. Not going to be a fun night for him. As we scroll down, I love George Springer at $4,000 against Jared Weaver. Finally found the seats yesterday. He's got 2 good big games in a row. Stolen base, home run. The guy's been finally getting it going. Adam Jones at $3,900. If you're not playing Gio, we know he's been a lefty masher throughout his career. Chris Colabello, if he's in the lineup there, you like him at $3,800. Is a cheap piece of that Toronto stack. David Peralta is a lefty-lefty. I'm not touching him. I'd much prefer his teammate there. AJ Pollock, he's $4,800 against Brett Anderson. We know he kills left-handed pitching. The guy can do it all. I love him as a tournament option. I think he's going to be really low owned. And then other guys, as you scroll down more, Michael Conforto, another lefty, you can look at against Shelby Miller. And then some cheaper guys here. Andre Ethier, $2,900. Should be batting, I would assume, 4th or 5th in this lineup. He hasn't been great over the last couple weeks, but it's a fine matchup. If he's in the lineup, Trace Thompson at $3,500 against Wolf. Wolf has gotten roughed up after those random good starts he had at first. Justin Ruggiano, $3,300. If he's batting atop that lineup, you got to like him. And then last cheap guy, Brandon Guyer at $3,000 against the lefty and Rodriguez. Homered in his last game. It's not a guy that really has much upside like that, but it's a fine matchup, and he does hit lefties very well, so I'm certainly giving him a look also. And that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out the rest of our great content. We've got MLB until the end. We've got NFL, college football, lots of great content to help you win at dailyfantasycafe.com.